Thank you for joining us for today's Shenzhen Bee discussion on digitization. I'm Khalifa Crawford. I am publisher of Sourcing Journal. The fashion industry is entering a new phase, one that will put even more pressure on the supply chain, and brands and retailers can no longer move along with business as usual or accept incremental change. It really is time for us to take a big leap forward. And with me today to discuss how the industry can finally realize the benefits of digitization are Lisa Morales-Helabo, CEO and founder of Refashion Ventures, and Karsten Newberry, Chief Strategy and Digital Officer of Gerber Technology. Thank you guys for joining.
Thanks for having us.
So Karsten, I'm going to start with you. Let's talk a little bit about the fact that, the term digital transformation is not new for the fashion industry. There's been a lot of talk about it. There's been less progress though. So what do you think, has really been kind of the hiccup or the pitfall in terms of companies really kind of getting the benefit of these tools?
Yeah, it's a great topic and one that we've been thinking about quite a bit also as a technology provider. But first of all, if you look at the fashion industry, specifically, there's been a lot of progress on the consumer side. Over the last 10 to 15 years, you've had the growth of e-commerce, a lot more on-demand type shopping. So on the consumer side, a lot of opportunities have been unlocked. But if you look at the back end of what's happened there, there's been this big shift to lowest possible cost production. And, it's shifted a lot of the manufacturing offshore and just driven this big wave of driving more efficiency. And, honestly, from what we're looking at, that's consumed a lot of the energy of the industry to go and, yes, make a lot of advances, give the consumers, a lot more affordable products, get them out there. But with it have come a lot of other challenges. And it's really not led to adopting certain technologies and digital technologies in a way that is necessary now. But it's really a lot of this shift that, to low cost offshore manufacturing. We believe that's consumed a lot of this energy that could or now will have to be spent on other digitization technologies.
And Lisa, what's your perspective? Again, as we talk about digitization, there's been a lot of talk about data and what it could potentially lend to individual companies and the industry at large. But, I'm not sure that a lot of companies really understand data, how to use it, what they could get out of it. So as you're talking to your clients, what are some of the common misconceptions that you're hearing?
So I think people think that as long as they have data systems and AI, machine learning, that they're suddenly going to be profitable. But data is only as good as the context that you're looking at it in, the lens you're looking at it under, and how you're going to use it. What are you going to do once you understand the actual mechanics of your business and your customers? So a lot of companies have had this massive push to get all the data, but data is the new oil. You can either be drinking from the fountain and becoming, the most healthy, future-ready company in the world, or you can drown in it. So you need to really be thoughtful about your intentions and who in your company is going to be using this data, to what end, and what data is useful versus creating additional noise. It's not a panacea. And you really, I tell everyone that I meet that the two things that I think are most valuable, that every executive, every college student, if you have free time now that we're all in COVID quarantine, take an online course in data science, because the world is data, especially now that supply chains for the first time in history are actually being digitized. It's, there's all these fancy definitions of fourth industrial revolution and getting into the specifics of exactly what's happening. But my succinct way of summarizing it is that for the first time in history, everything can talk to everything else physically. And that is the biggest potential opportunity of our lifetime, but it's all run on data.
And maybe just to add one point to that, Cleta, is, that connectivity and that integration is also one of the challenges, in terms of adoption, right? Because today, really in the industry, we have a lot of islands of information, but plugging it together in the workflows that really get you that actionable intelligence and improve business, that's one of the key challenges.
Yep. Right. And I think you both bring up a really good point, and it dovetails together, which is having that intentionality, understanding what you're trying to achieve with the data is really important. So Carson, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about specifically when we're looking at product development, because that is an area where both in time and in money, there's a lot of waste. When we talk about the fact that now the supply chain being digitized can talk to each other, that could be a big leap forward because communication is a big problem. When you talk to factories, if you talk to brands, both sides say that's where they just kind of, the pieces are not coming together. So if companies were to lean into data, Carson, what kind of improvements could they see in that area specifically?
Yeah, as you say, there's a lot of waste in that whole product development process. And if you think about it, from an idea to, for a fashion product to the finished product on the shelf, on average, still, before COVID, most companies still took about 42 weeks for that, close to a year. So in today's world, you just can't develop a product and then hope that it will sell in a year from now. It just doesn't work that way anymore. So there's a lot of waste there. If you think of even areas like sample management, all the physical samples that got shipped back and forth, which now also is a lot bigger challenge during COVID. There are billions of dollars spent each year just on samples, right? And they're slow, right? So this is really where digital product development comes in and can and needs to unleash a lot of this value. So you can go from an idea that gets created upfront in a design tool, it could be Adobe, to managing that in your PLM system, to connecting it with the patterns that define the design for manufacturing, integrating that with 3D simulations, and doing all that in an integrated workflow that allows you to create product that is ready to be made, but doesn't, in the best case, even require a single prototype, or you'll have a prototype that you make with nearshore, quick turnaround manufacturing. We'll get to that later probably. But that whole digital product development process is what is needed. A lot of the pieces are there, but bringing it all together and making it work, that's what will unleash billions of cost savings, and more importantly, save a ton of time. And you can do it in a way that's safe today because people have to collaborate digitally. Now we're seeing a lot of interest in PLM and these digital collaboration tools right now. And this is really fundamental to be able to create product. And we're going to see a lot new companies, emerging startups that create and develop product that is never made, that's brought onto websites and e-commerce, where you can really sell a product before you've ever made it. And so that whole demand-driven development process, as opposed to what used to be the planning-driven process, is really where the value is.
Right. So companies.
I would love to add on to that. So something you mentioned, Carsten, made me realize that we are taking this shift from, literally, it's like when Ford said if you asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. We're at that moment in time where we're shifting from supply chains where we asked the industry what they wanted and they said a better crystal ball, with data. But what we're talking about is shifting from supply chains to demand chains. And that's
right.
An entirely different animal.
Agreed.
Yeah. Exactly. And as you mentioned, that solves a lot of different problems, because going from, the supply chain where we're kind of pushing product out and hoping someone buys it, to a demand chain where you can really get a read on what people want and then create it, that saves money, that saves the environment. It solves a lot of the problems that the industry has been talking about, and the solution is kind of all in this one place. Karsten, can you talk to us a little bit about, you mentioned the fact that obviously across the supply chain, every player would need to be able to speak to each other in this digital way. So, and I've heard some factories talk about the challenges that they have in terms of they want to come up to speed and they want to be using the same tools that their brands or retailers are. Obviously, though, you know, as with everything, cost is a factor. Can you talk a little bit about how the whole industry can kind of, in some way, help one another kind of move forward?
Yeah, I think the underlying, you know, key component for success is a little bit more on the mindset side, where you really think about this as more strategic partnerships. There's been a lot of focus in the past on just lowest cost of production. I talk about that a lot because it's just symptomatic for how people have thought about working together. If you think differently about, okay, how do we really optimize as partners that development process and help each other, then, you know, yes, there may be investment in the tools, but it becomes a lot more strategic. And actually, there's a lot of money you can save in the process if you look at it holistically. You know, if you can shave off 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks even from a development process, that's a lot of money, right? If you don't launch one single product that you can avoid because you've digitally, you know, prototyped it and can avoid physical cost, that far outweighs in many cases some of these investments. So we're actually seeing some leading brands and retailers now engaging much more closely with factories to talk about, okay, how do we exchange information, and not just pattern information, which has been done, but, you know, 3D simulations. How do we connect through PLM and bring all that together? So, you know, that's really what it's going to take is, you know, more strategic partnerships. And then, you know, the technology partners are pretty creative. Usually they'll find solutions to help make it happen.
Yeah, so this idea of strategic partnerships is really important because, as you say, when you're chasing the cheapest needle, there's a lot of jumping around as opposed to kind of figuring out, this is a good partner for me to work with. How can we work more deeply, more closely together? Because it benefits both sides. So I think that's really important, and maybe something that will evolve out of the COVID-19 crisis as, you know, factories and brands, everyone's seeing how everyone's being treated in this moment. So I think there's going to be some reevaluations of some relationships, and maybe that'll actually have a positive outcome in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So moving a little bit further downstream as we're looking at from product development to, let's talk a little bit about the assortment and allocation piece of it. And that's a big place where data can also play a role. Again, with the pandemic crisis, it's more important than ever for companies to be agile and to be able to move product from their e-commerce distribution to their stores that may or may not be open. Talk to me a little bit about some retailers that you're seeing out there, Karsten, that are actually being successful right now and clearly have put some of the pieces in place to do this.
Yeah. So one of the examples that I find interesting here is Target. You know, it's a global company. Obviously, they have a big North American footprint. But if you remember, you know, a few years ago when Amazon and all the online business really started having an impact, a lot of people started writing Target off, and they had to reinvent themselves and spent a lot of money and time investing in a model that works for them. So that's one of the other key things, is really figuring out how you want to serve your consumers and create value. So a lot of people have talked about the end of brick and mortar, and there's certainly going to be a lot of pain here following COVID-19. But you can also sense that we're all stuck and we want to get out and we do want to shop some more. But this notion where Target had invested in buying online, you know, picking up in store, initially just outside in a safe way, now coming in a more safe way, but creating an experience where you know, you can really have both an online experience and an in-person fulfillment. Something that I think Target's done very well through technology, also leveraging their stores as warehouse hubs, taking a lot of cost out of this whole distribution, you know, the last mile, so to speak. I forget the exact statistic, but a large majority of all fulfillment for Target online orders are you know, through the stores. So using them as logistics hubs. And so there are just a number of really good ways that they've used technology and are continuing to invest in that to build a sustainable and a profitable business model. And maybe that's one of the things too, is there is no quick fix to any of this. You really have to have a long-term vision. You can start with technology today. There's a ton of technology out there, but really the way to succeed long-term is to really have a continuous improvement plan.
Right. I mean, it's really interesting how their move toward, like you were saying, instituting some things like buy online, pick up in store has really helped them de-risk now. This is a complete unforeseen, obviously, but like you said, having that already in place and those wheels already turning, they were in a really good position to be able to execute in a situation like this. Lisa, so we're talking about agility, and I know you know a little bit about this. At the start of the COVID crisis, you have been instrumental in helping to bring some PPE production in the US at a time where we were scrambling and out. So can you talk to us a little bit about what that process was like and the partners that you were able to pull together to do that?
Sure. Yeah. You know, it's been an interesting few months. We've certainly had a lot of agile exploration, and my background is design thinking, so we've applied design thinking processes to everything we do. And we started initially on March 20th, much like many other organizations, just putting out a form saying, how can we help? And because we have the benefit of our Worldwide Supply Chain Federation network, we had a lot of inbound interest from our network saying, we'd like to support this. How can we offer help to whatever you're doing? So the first thing that we tried to tackle was procurement and helping weed through the noise of all of a sudden all these new distributors and aggregate buyers for the governments and states and hospitals, the frontline workers that suddenly were thrown into the fray of going from picking up the phone and calling their procurement partners that have been in place for 20 years to, oh no, now we have to check against everyone in the world and start procurement on the fly while we have no visibility into their actual credentials. So it led to a lot of piracy, fraud. We've even seen some drug cartels getting in on the game, laundering money. It's been insane. So the first area we wanted to help was helping to cut through the noise of vetting and validating suppliers through procurement people that have been in the industry for decades. And we were fortunate enough to have JOR reach out to us. They're one of the largest wholesale retail fashion marketplaces. And Kristen Sevilla offered her procurement team. She said, I want to help. Let's get some of our people supporting this. What do you need? So for the first couple of weeks, we just were taking phone calls, vetting, validating certifications, ISOs, FDAs, NIOSH, et cetera, getting actual credentials and making reference calls. Then we moved into how do we standardize this data and make it more useful beyond just a marketplace? What is the bigger long-term need here? Because people are getting PPE, they have lots of donations at first, but one of the things that I've been focused on is localization made in the USA as part of our job creation, national security, and economic development strategy for the past 6 years. So we turned to focus on that. And in doing so, we had other partners like IBM reach out to us. We were one of their first Rapid Supplier Connect partners, putting all of the credentials we've been validating onto the blockchain. And then, so JOR, IBM, and then Gerber. Karsten here actually reached out to me fairly early on. And we were discussing the Made in the USA initiatives and how we could perhaps collaborate with all the different resources we were pulling together to layer on top of what they had been doing with retooling factories here in the US to be able to produce PPE. And so Karsten said, well, we've got 1,200 or so factories across the Americas. We could use some help getting them some purchase orders. Now that they're retooling, They need their ISO certifications, FDA certs, purchase orders, getting them connected with the right government bodies and hospitals. So we have been facilitating that, not by building something from scratch, but by orchestrating the best of breed of the localized connected supply chain. As I had been researching for 6 years, instead of trying to pull something together from nothing, we had all the players in place and we just started orchestrating their collaboration and connecting these distributed pieces. So think we have an SEC compliant financing platform that's on the blockchain. We have IBM's Rapid Supplier Connect. We've got wholesale marketplaces. We've got the network of factories across the US. We're partnered with SGS, helping all of the factories get their certifications. And we've been talking regularly to the National Association of State Procurement Officers, because this is something that they haven't seen. Someone actually rolling up their sleeves and helping these factories, the SMBs, to get to where they need to be to actually become valid players for the localized market.
So this is kind of a good lesson learned that, as you said, the pieces were out there. It was a matter of making the connections and kind of validating things. And so as we're looking forward, you know, if we're using maybe this as a bit of a case study, what has been able to be done just since March, as we're looking forward, what could this mean for fashion? And maybe both of you can answer. Karsten, maybe you can start us off about like, what can fashion learn from this process and learn about cooperation and how much further we can get together?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give a shot and then Lisa can add to it. But you know, it's certainly back to also this demand-driven supply chain, and I think what Lisa and the team have done, and also what we've seen through our own PPE efforts, has really been that, as you say, there are a lot, you know, technologies out there. You just need to leverage it and bring it together in a way that allows for very agile collaboration. The one constant we're going to see is uncertainty, right? Uncertain demand, you know, demand categories. Is it going to be more the leisure type wear going forward versus formal wear? Just to use one example, you know, what are the buying demographics? And it's going to change, and it can change very, very rapidly depending on where countries open up or not. And so this ability to be responsive is the key lesson. It can be done, right? You know, there are plenty of companies that just shut down and did nothing. But I think we're at over 1,600 companies now, at least globally, that have responded in a way in terms of, you know, retooling to PPE. The things that Lisa and Refashion have done shows it's possible. So really thinking about your business in a way that in the past, cost and quality were the key competitive differentiators. Just simplifying a little bit here, but today, agility and responsiveness, a lot of people also talk about this, you know, supply chain resilience. That's really a core competence you need to build. The good news is it's absolutely possible if you get the right people with the energy behind it and put the technology pieces together. It's absolutely possible. And I would expect that platforms such as Lisa's will really thrive and be hubs, not anymore just for PPE, but for that collaboration between the different players going forward.
Yeah, so for fashion, I started noodling on localization of supply chains in fashion after I founded and built the New York Fashion Tech Lab, because I realized, like Karsten started us with, saying that everyone's focused on front-end consumer-facing experiences, but you can't have an agile, amazing front end with a static back end. So your supply chain, folks, it's kind of the perfect storm for fashion to use this moment to reset. And some of the biggest shifts that I've found are hardest for most of these companies is to shift from creative-driven processes to constraints-driven processes. And from your concept of predicting the future supply to really iterating and being agile to meet demand. And so it's kind of when you put it into simple terms, it's a no-brainer because your unit economics are vastly different. You know, I've been working with brands since 2015 on this localization strategy. And some of the first pushback I would get all the time is, well, what's the price? Your landed cost of goods sold. And I'd say, well, of course, we're not going to be able to compete with overseas wages, but it's not, you're looking at it in too small of a lens. If you compare the cost of your globalized supply chain and your $50 billion of dead stock that you're producing at great margins, yay! We had, pennies to get those t-shirts made, but nobody wanted them. So the cost not only of that dead stock, but the cost on the planet that it used resources to create it, to warehouse it, to try to sell it, to discount it, and then to re-warehouse it before it eventually ends up in landfill or incineration. All of these things we're starting to learn are no longer tenable. And we have to shift collectively from this consumptive consumerism to constraints-focused demand. And it's possible. It requires collaboration, and it requires really being brutally honest with yourself as a business that your globalized supply chains have a lot of fat that can be cut. And it's not to say for everything that you'll be able to localize and create efficiencies and sustainability and circularity and transparency through regionalized systems that are shared with your competitors. But it is a mandate that it's possible now, we've been proving, and it also makes better sense financially and for the planet for the long term.
Yeah, and I mean, we also, just like Lisa said, and we did some economic analysis actually, if you do factor in that waste, like products that are made very efficiently, but that never get bought, right, or end up in a landfill, if you factor that in, then the unit economics actually of these so-called micro factories or on-demand manufacturing are actually there. They can be more profitable in the end if you can sell through, if you only make what gets bought. Then they're absolutely at least as profitable. We're happy to I know together, Lisa and Refashion and Gerber, we've done some analysis on that. Happy to share that too with those interested. And the other thing I would say, the technology will continue to evolve, but to wait for it to be ready is also a mistake. I think the best way today is to really start a very specific activity pilot. The technologies are there, and I think PPE and the COVID crisis show that.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you're talking about the unit economics, because I think when we talk about shifting mindsets, that's a big piece of it. Again, when I'm talking to factories, I hear that they are often getting mixed messages from, just within one retailer. If they're, depending on what buyer they're talking to, if they're talking to the sustainability people, it's a different message. So the buyers often are still, the sourcing people are often still incentivized to find that lowest price, that lowest cost. And, so that message is not permeating the whole organization, that, we need to be looking at the waste and what that's costing us. And so not looking at the pennies that it costs to create the goods in the beginning. So there's still a lot, I think, to evolve in terms of those mindsets.
Absolutely. And it's that shift in simple terms from that planning driven approach to we know what we have to make and let's make it as cheap as possible, to realizing, no, in many cases we don't know. No matter how big your forecasting team is, even if you're using AI, you may not know what people are going to need in a few months from now. So you got to break up your product offering into products where you have high volumes that are very predictable, and look at those that are not, or that have short runs, and then manage your supply chain accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of supply chain management, Lisa, when the crisis started, very quickly, retailers and brands recognized that in a lot of cases, they didn't really know what was happening in the supply chain. They didn't really know where their products were, and they had a lot of trouble because it's a very opaque system right now. How can we bring some transparency and visibility to the supply chain? How can we unlock that?
Sure. I think blockchain has finally found its moment. this much talked about, innovation darling finally has its moment to shine. And we found that, especially because of the crisis, that when you get an immutable record that's authenticated and you have put in all of the credentialing on this immutable record for all the parties involved, it creates speed that is so critical in a time of crisis, and it creates agility. So for example, we've been talking to government offices about how we've been thinking about creating physical distributed collaborative networks that are married with digital distributed collaborative networks, and the agility that creates to be able to say, okay, instead of having an RFP you put out to the world as a government, say, state entity, and getting bids, and then finally awarding it after a period of months and months to give one factory the work, the purchase order, and create local jobs. We're saying that a better model is to already know all the factories on our regionalized local infrastructure that have the same exact credentials, that have the ISO 9001 certifications, the 13485s. They've done the Tech Pack lab testing of their finished goods and have the FDA certs for 510Ks. And they can produce the same exact isolation gown that you, government, are looking for. So instead of having to put out a bid or an RFP and waiting months, you can instantly have access to, oh, we already have all of the answers we need for producing what we're looking to buy here in the United States. And instead of awarding it to one factory, which is hard enough in the US, the government just recently put out an RFP for a billion isolation gowns. And a few weeks later realized they had to claw that back because there just is no capacity to, through one single entity, let alone collectively in the US, to produce all those. So through our network, we could say, sure, put out, your, 500 million isolation gowns. And over a period of time, we can have it distributed across this network of factories that all have the same credentials to produce it, creating a redistribution of economic impact. And that's what we're moving towards. It's really a massive leap forward for supply chain agility, resiliency, finance, kind of all in one. And I'm frankly still floored every day that I get to play in this space, and I'm working with such brilliant people that are so bought into this much needed shift. We're just attracting the best of the best that are finding out what we've been working on and coming to the table every day saying, how can we help?
Right. So you were saying that blockchain provides that agility. It also provides the transparency because as you're saying, it's immutable. So the information that's in there should be factual and no one can change it. So along with the transparency though comes accountability, which I think is kind of lacking, especially when we're talking about some sustainability initiatives that companies have. It's very difficult for companies to feel confident going out and marketing around their sustainability initiatives when they can't be sure what's really happening in their supply chain. So, talk to us a little bit about blockchain and other ways that companies can get that assurance through traceability and transparency.
Yeah, I'll, without naming names, I'll mention I was on an important government phone call where we were talking about localized supply chains and the issues that are arising, the lack of agility, lack of transparency. And I had mentioned blockchain. Another major player in the food supply chain space said, no, we don't have monopolies here. It's fine. It's just, pushing back very hard on blockchain. And I was like, isn't that interesting? You're really resistant to the transparency that it creates and the evening of the playing field. So you really have to look at it for what it is. There's going to be resistance from the incumbents and the lobbyists and all the industries that benefit from status quo and the lack of transparency. But it really is just going to take bold partners coming together to create the new value chains of the future to prove to everyone that it's just a better mousetrap. It's time to let legacy systems die and move forward in a more transparent, collaborative model.
Yeah, it's not just blockchain though. I mean, if you just look at sensors are everywhere now. You know, we have, even on our machines, we have hundreds, if not thousands of them that feed information up. You've got phones everywhere. The manufacturing floor, even in the apparel industry, that's, you know, a bit behind technologically compared to some of the other industries, is starting to adopt all the, you know, call it IoTification or sensor adoption. And that information is going to be aggregated and it's going to become available. So I think there is, I don't think that can be stopped in terms of the availability of information. So over time, that'll actually drive then much more informed, you know, business decision and marketing that's based on real data. And, you know, sustainability started out as a marketing initiative, but I feel pretty confident that right now, talking to a lot of, you know, sustainability officers or supply chain officers, it's really turned for the better already. Still a lot to do, but it's not just this marketing gimmick anymore. It is really about how do we, you know, cut waste, because in the end, you know, if you cut waste, then you're going to be more sustainable.
And not just more sustainable, but more profitable. I think that we've literally been beating this sustainability drum for 36 years or so. We've moved about a centimeter in this 1,000-mile journey. It's sheer insanity to think that we are going to be able to take the existing globalized supply chain with its billions of nodes and make it transparent and connected within the 10 years that we have left to have this massive impact on our planet. So I agree, it's sensors, it's actually understanding that you as an industry, you as a company, can no longer just look at your landed cost of goods sold, and you need to understand part of the cost of doing business is being a responsible steward of your impact on the planet, on the people that you, the communities you interact with, and your employees. And that needs to become a equally valued component of doing business. Your end of use life cycle for your textiles has to be accounted for. We have other countries that are actually creating legislation around this. The US is a little behind, considering we produce 4 times the textile waste of every other country in the world. We should get on that. So it's a massive, not only sustainability opportunity, but profitability. There's all these assets that we've been throwing in the trash that actually, it's an asset we can reuse over and over again and extend the value from that initial investment.
So I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here. You know, even if I'm buying into everything that, you know, both you, Karsten, and Lisa are saying about technology and what technology can deliver in terms of long-term benefits, right now, if I'm a brand or a retailer, what I'm hearing is I have to invest in order to get there. And a lot of brands and retailers, of course, right now are cash strapped. You know, the uncertainty has them just really holding on to their money. So Karsten, are there quick wins that could be out there, even if you don't have deep pockets to invest in all of this technology right now? Yeah,
no, I certainly think so. I mean, first of all, I mean, all businesses right now need to watch cash. I mean, I think it's just a sign of the times and uncertainty that that's the case. No, the smart ones look at preserving more cash in some areas so they can still invest in some others, right? Because there will be some investment needed, but investment also means allocating your people in the right way. So that's, I think, where the biggest quick win opportunity is. You know, if people aren't, you know, as productive or they can't work right now, there's a ton of you know, training they can take online, learn about, you know, 3D simulation, learn about other technologies that they can then leverage to digitally collaborate. So I think the quick wins are really, I mean, stepping back, first of all, thinking about how you want to create value for your customers, and then what parts of your business can you leverage digital technologies for, and then really working partnerships. You know, with your suppliers, with your other business partners, and you know, the sample management itself, I think, is a big win that companies can focus in on right now, because it just drives a lot of cost savings and time savings, and you can do a lot digitally now. So I don't think the investments need to be massive to start really reaping some of those returns. And then, you know, you can grow from there. You can always look at partnerships too. On-demand manufacturing, for example, a lot of brands may not be willing to invest in domestic manufacturing, but there are other companies that are, right? And then they might pool the demand of multiple brands. So I think just looking out for who can you collaborate with is the other quick win. And it's possible today to have a product designed in days or weeks digitally, and then to have it made within a day, right? That technology is there. So I think just focusing in on where can you reap some of what's out there is the quick win I see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll also touch on that. I think that simple things that businesses can sort of reflect on themselves, hold up a mirror and say, why are we doing certain processes, and what has served us, and what has led to where we are, and why are we still doing the same things? You know, if you keep going back to the well of the McKinseys of the world to tell you what you should be building, has that been working? I'll speak from my own perspective that I think the majority of these companies are looking for outsiders to come in and give them a magic formula. But if you hire someone to solve a problem for you, and they haven't been dedicating, say, their entire lives or career on that problem set, you're paying them millions of dollars to go and research. And inherently, when you're researching, you're mostly looking backwards than really helping you to look forwards. So I'd like to say to the enterprise companies out there, stop looking in the same places for new solutions.
Okay. And that's a good place to leave the discussion. I appreciate your time, Lisa and Karsten, and I'm sure we've given everyone kind of a lot to think about as we're trying to figure out what the post-recovery is going to look like from COVID.
Great. Yeah, and let's
Thank you so
really
much.
keep the dialogue. We're all on social media, LinkedIn, especially Lisa. So we're looking forward to continuing the dialogue. And thanks a lot to Sourcing
Yes.
Journal.
Reach out to us. Thank you.